Hi, I'm Earl Butch Graves Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise. Thanks for joining me for today's episode of From the Corner Office. Recent events highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic and a renewed focus on racial equality have dramatically altered how we conduct business, as well as fueled debate over the inclusion of African Americans within a shifting landscape. The question, however, remains, will Blacks ever achieve parity and reciprocity when it comes to gaining access to business opportunities? My guest today is perfectly suited to tackle this issue. R. Donahue Peebles is not only among the nation's most successful real estate entrepreneurs, but also a fierce champion for Black business and wealth creation. As chairman and CEO of the Peebles Corporation, he operates a top privately held real estate development firm with a multi-billion-dollar portfolio spanning key markets that include New York, LA, Boston, Miami, Charlotte, and Washington, D.C. An early student of real estate and politics, Don achieved multimillionaire status by age 27 and has been a transformative force in the industry for over 30 years. In fact, he made history with the 2004 acquisition of Royal Palm Resort in Miami Beach, developing the first Black-owned luxury resort. That same year, Peebles Corp also earned the distinction of being named the Black Enterprise Company of the Year. The company's impact is due in large part to core principles Don calls affirmative development, his intentional focus to empower women and minorities in closing the wealth gap. He demonstrated his commitment last year with the creation of a $500 million fund for diverse property developers. And he continues to influence change by bolstering communities of color, exposing youth to business, and advocating for corporate America to fulfill its obligations to African Americans. Don, thank you for joining me.
Good to be here, Butch.
And Don, I think it would be, I would be remiss if I didn't give you an opportunity to let or give our audience a sense, because unlike some of the people who are occupying lofty positions in politics today, who got their start in real estate, many of them started on third base and pretended as if they, came from the bottom of the bootstraps and built themselves up. But I'm going to leave that to the side for a moment. But I'd love for you to be able to share with the audience how you got started in real estate in the very first place, and the time and effort, because it's not just happy luck, it's hard work and perseverance, but how you got started in the real estate business in the first place, and then were able to become a millionaire at age 27 in the real estate business without really a history of real estate development in your family or otherwise.
Well, great, Butch. I mean, it's, my story is like so many of our stories. I think in terms of where I came from, my parents, my grandparents were both all born in the segregated South, either in North Carolina or Virginia. And my maternal grandparents moved to Washington, D.C. separately with their parents in search of a better life. And my father, who grew up in the segregated South of rural Virginia, and my grandfather was a public school janitor in a school that my father could not attend. And my father was drafted in the Korean War. After being discharged, he came to Washington, D.C., and my parents met. And I was born in 1960. And so I kind of began to be more conscious of what was happening in my surroundings as a young boy at 8 years old, seeing the civil rights movement and then the riots that took place as a result of Dr. King's assassination. And so I can remember vividly when Dr. King was assassinated, and I can remember when Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and I remember the country back then, and then how the country made progress. Especially for us as Black Americans, we made progress as a result of so many people who came before us. And so I happened to grow up in Washington, D.C., where I was born. And I had a chance to see our government up close, but also when I was 14 years old, the city got the right to elect its own government for the first time. And it elected a Black mayor, and the city elected a majority Black city council. And then 4 years later, a person I met as a teenager became the mayor of Washington, D.C., that was Marion Barry. And his agenda was focused on economic empowerment for Black Americans. And so and his administration made a very conscientious and deliberate effort to empower Black businesses. My mother, after my parents got divorced when I was 5 years old, my mother ultimately got into real estate sales after buying a home in Prince George's County, Maryland, at a subdivision and seeing how little work the broker or the sales agent did to make a commission, and figured she could do that as well. And then got a real estate sales license after going to school part-time, and then became a broker when we moved to Detroit in the late 1960s. And she had her own brokerage business for a number of years and came back to DC when I was a teenager, and worked in Fannie Mae, and then went out on her own because she could not see an environment where she could succeed in terms of executive leadership in Fannie Mae. And so I got exposed to real estate very early on through her. And then I went to college, in 1978, after spending my last 2 years of high school working I was a page on the Hill initially, and then working for John Conyers, Charlie Rangel, and Ron Dellums. And I got a chance to see some of the most transformational Black leaders of our time on Capitol Hill. And so after a year in college, I decided that, I'm not going to go into medicine. So I changed my mind and came back to DC and started working in the real estate business. And I felt DC was a great environment to be in because the political environment there was about empowering Black businesses. And so I got the great benefit of being in that kind of environment.
There's no question that Marion Barry and Maynard Jackson and people, like them were very intentional on wanting to make sure and create opportunities for African Americans in real estate development. You were a young man at the time you came back from college to enter into pursuing your dreams of real estate development. What were the initial things and what were the initial obstacles? Because I think oftentimes young people, stop after the first obstacle thrown their way and not realizing it's not going to be handed to you that easy. But what were some of the initial obstacles you had to get over to land your first and second deal in Washington, D.C. in real estate development?
Okay. Well, first, I think that, I grew up in a very unique time in the country. And I had a chance to see other people breaking barriers. And one of the things that, as I mentioned to you before, that I've appreciated is when your father started Black Enterprise, I, as a young teenager, was able to read about other Black people doing business and entrepreneurship. No one in my family essentially had been an entrepreneur, but I saw that that was an available opportunity out there. I saw some of these political leaders like John Conyers and others stand up for opportunities. And so I saw that they were out there. However, what I realized, in fact, my first building, I worked on this project in Washington, D.C. in an area called Anacostia, in which the commercial corridor of that community had been destroyed by the '68 riots and never rebuilt. And so Barry targeted that area for economic development. I ended up acquiring a site in that community and then proposed leasing an office building to the city of Washington, D.C. as a white developer who had tried to gain control of the site I got control of, had proposed to the city and the city agreed to. So I did that, so I reached an agreement with the city on a letter of intent to pre-lease office space in a building that we would build that would kickstart economic revitalization of that community. And so, as I was working away in my office, I got a call from the Washington Post. And so I thought it was like a goodwill kind of story, and that the reporter was calling me to congratulate me, local resident, local Washingtonian, born and raised in DC, young Black person growing up in DC public schools, had, done something significant. And so when I called the reporter back and returned his call, he told me he was an investigative reporter from the Washington Post, and they were looking into my deal because I had been, a protege or mentee of Marion Barry, and therefore they were interested in, how that deal got done and why the city would ever lease office space in an area that was so neglected economically. And I was shocked because I was expecting this liberal paper, the Washington Post, that was filled with these do-good, white writers, were going to say, hey, great, this is what we've all been fighting for. And instead, they look to find every single thing wrong and to try to disrupt the deal. I mean, they contacted all the government employees working on the lease. They contacted city council members and so many other people. And I remember the one saving grace was that the mayor had signed a letter of intent for this white developer for an office building on my site for $22.50 a square foot triple net. And I had proposed a deal at $18.75 per square foot triple net. And I had these development partners, two Jewish guys and a Greek guy, and they were saying, why would we ever propose a deal to the city for less money than the city already was willing to do a deal on? In fact, because you're a minority, you should charge more money. Because they had this perception that doing business with us was less cost effective. And so I explained to them, it's a black tax. We're going to have to protect ourselves because people are going to question it. And so the fact of the matter was that the city had already committed to doing a deal with a white developer, and they were doing a deal with me for less money. And that was a saving grace. Otherwise, I mean, they were trying to dismantle my project, and I could not believe it. So what resulted, though, is that my deal went on the front page, A1, of the Washington Post. By the way, this is around the same time of the Iran-Contra affair. Reagan's on the front page of the Washington Post. And there I am, my little building in Anacostia, on the front page of the Washington Post. And what I realized from that moment on is that one of the biggest protectors of the status quo, and one of the biggest obstacles, was the white media because of how they portrayed us in every way. And so my biggest obstacle for the next decade and a half or more was the media. Every time I did a deal and there was a losing party on the other side that was white, they figured they could attack me by using the media. And in DC, it was the Washington Post. And so that was my biggest obstacle.
So you had it was a rude awakening to, quite honestly, the insidiousness of racism and how it was going to, which still continues to this day. We'll get to that in a moment, but still continues to this day. But it was a very rude awakening to, because everything you did was right, up to the fact that the point of it said, oh, whoa, we're about to give this black person a deal, and that's not what we bargained for.
Yeah.
Ultimately, and I want to kind of go talk a little bit more, Don, about the real estate industry as a whole, but you evolved from Washington, D.C., and ultimately made your way to Miami. And if you would share a little bit about how you got to Miami and then how that really became where you catapulted your business dramatically from where you were in Washington, D.C., and now you're in Florida and became a major developer in a lot of different cities, but really Florida was the key, as you shared with me before, how making that move and making that decision to go to Florida, not that you turned your back on Washington, D.C., because you're still a native, if you will, of Washington, D.C. But talk about Florida and what that opportunity meant and going out and taking a chance and betting on yourself and what that meant.
Okay, well, so the deal I talked about in Anacostia, that deal was in 1986. So I was on the front page of the Washington Post in late 1986 or early 1987. And all that was the city agreeing to sign a lease with us on a building to be built. If we didn't deliver the building, the city paid no money. They only consumed the product from us that was superior to others. And that was a big fight. But in DC, the largest dominant tenant in the marketplace was the federal government, and the second largest tenant was the DC government. And so it's a nation's capital. It's dominated by government tenants, and the biggest industry of real estate, or the biggest sector, was commercial office buildings. And so that's what I focused my energy on. And so constantly you're trying to do business with the government because that's the tenant to land. And at the time I was doing business, the federal government leased over 40 million square feet of office space in Washington, D.C., but less than 100,000 from Black property owners in a city that was 70% Black property. So, I continued to try to knock down those barriers. And during the S&L crises, and that was, caused by the junk bond crisis in the early 90s, I went out and bought a series of property at bargain basement prices. And so the city of Washington, under a new mayor, was trying to bring in the Washington Wizards from Landover, Maryland, to downtown DC, and they were going to build an arena for them, and at the government's cost, and they needed land, so they were going to clear out a site that required them to vacate a couple of government office buildings. So they needed a new place to go. So they had a big competition. I bought several buildings with other partners, including a large private equity fund, at bargain prices. So we undercut everybody. So when they did the scoring, our deal was $58 million less expensive than our nearest competitor. And then you add on top of it, we let them buy the buildings for $1. There were 2 buildings for $1 that they bought after the 11th year. So no long-term equity for us. And it was a great deal for the city. And they awarded it to us. Now, Barry had won re-election after leaving office during a scandal, and got re-elected to the city council and then back in office 4 years after he left. And so the deal lingered until he came back into office. Well, of course, the powers that be were outraged that he was back in office, and the Post was zeroing in on him. So Bob Johnson of BET said it's unfair that the taxpayers carry the burden to build the arena themselves. And so he offered to build the arena, and with his own money, and as long as he had a first right of refusal to buy the team at some point in time. Well, they turned him down, and the media attacked him and called him the arena wrecker. And then with me, they attacked my leases, saying it was a sweetheart deal for Barry, and that it was another cronyism deal with Barry, even though the previous administration of Sharon Pratt Kelly said we were $58 million less expensive than anybody else. So ultimately, that deal got disapproved or got withdrawn from the city council, because the city council had to approve it. The Washington Post did 2 editorials. They did a series of stories. They had an investigative reporter on it. And so they destroyed my lease deal. So after that, it happened right around my anniversary, and got a young son. He was about a year old or so. And I said to myself, my God, if I can't win a deal in my own hometown and I'm $58 million less expensive, I certainly would have tried to make it maybe 20 million less expensive, but I was 58 million less expensive, and I can't do that and win there. This is not an environment for me. So I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I took a vacation with my wife, and we went to Miami, and I liked it there, and I got a vacation home, and then we went back there a few months later for New Year's Eve weekend, and I read an article in the Miami Herald about the city looking for a African-American developer to develop the Royal Palm Hotel because they had settled a tourism boycott by Black Americans and the NAACP and other organizations because of the lack of diversity in tourism. So I said, okay, this is my opportunity, my shot, and I made a decision to bid on it. And then 6 months later, we won the rights to develop that project, and I started building our business in Miami, and then ultimately moved my family from DC and moved my business from DC, and we headquartered in Miami. And from there, we had an incredible run. We did about $1 billion of projects in Miami, and then became a more national developer. And so I look at it where each step back is an opportunity in disguise. I mean, I was heartbroken and despondent because I said, if I can't win on my own home court and be $58 million less expensive, this is not an environment for me. And it turns out it wasn't an environment from that point on. DC has not been the environment for Black businesses that it was in the past, and still isn't, by the way.
Well, that's a great story, Don. And when one door closes, another door opens if you have the perseverance to want to continue to do so. Talked a little bit about the real estate industry let's take it from 2004 to 2000. I'll say 2019. We'll do pre-COVID-19. Dramatic growth in real estate, dramatic growth in development in cities across the country, many of which you got involved in, including New York and Los Angeles and Charlotte and some other cities. So what are the things that you were looking for when you're looking at new projects? And this would be helpful for folks to understand. What are the key things you're looking for in regards to doing a project? Because bigger is not always necessarily better, right? Sometimes big is good, but sometimes small is better because the margins may be better on small. So what are the key components you're looking for in terms of what would make a successful real estate deal?
I mean, I look for cities that I'm an urban developer, so I tend to look at cities that are urban and dense. And so as a result, we focus on markets where there are barriers to entry, either supply constrained development sites, regulatory environments that restrict supply artificially, but environments where it's harder to develop in, and so that you don't have five people across the street competing with you. So we look for markets there, but we look for the cities of the future. I mean, real estate's a very straightforward and simplistic business, and low barriers to entry. I'm an example of that. I had 1 year of college, and then I took some real estate classes and self-taught myself as well, and curated my education for real estate. But you can start off, as an appraiser or broker, and then become a developer in real estate. So there's these low barriers to entry. So it's a portable skill set as well, as shown from moving from DC to Miami. So what I looked at in Miami and what I've seen in other places like Charlotte is the cities of the future. They're on the upswing, as opposed to being established like in New York or Chicago, where there's limited opportunity for growth and greater opportunity for decline. So I look to places where there's opportunity to grow and where there's a growing population and a business-friendly environment. And then we look for filling what's, a niche that's not there at that particular time. Is it, larger condo units as opposed to smaller ones like we did in Miami at the Bass Club? Is it a hotel in South Beach? It's a new hotel that's got a boutique feel, but still like a convention hotel? Is it that, there are no apartments in a particular area or no condos? I mean, so we look to fill whatever is missing, but the key component is supply constraint, and the city's got the environment's on the upswing. The better years are ahead of it, and pro-business environment. And also, I mean, I look for a market also that's going to be receptive to me as a company and what we stand for as a company. So that is an environment that's going to have a Black population of significance, and an environment where the market is at least outwardly receptive to diversity.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, because without there being, and this is where politics flows into this as well, and you've navigated that extraordinarily well. But politics certainly plays a role in the selection process, because if you don't have a city or don't have a city councilor or a mayor or others who are committed in some way to trying to level the playing field, to provide opportunity through diverse initiatives, no matter what your price is, no matter how much lower your price is, or much better you may do something, if there's not a receptivity to, hey, let's do something that's fair. Let's make sure that this city that's 30% Black has something even remotely commensurate in regards to the development coming out of the city. Because that always, to me, when I look at New York, I'm born and raised in New York, and I look at New York and I look at the minority population, I look at the new buildings coming out of the ground and what's taking place in the development in Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan. I don't see people that look like us as owners of those buildings, right? And so while they may be taking our pension money because we're working for the city and all the above, that money is being given to someone else to develop, and that's something we're continuously behind. So clearly it has made a difference, and you've utilized it in the correct way. Let's jump forward a little bit to where we are today, and two pandemics. But we're going to start with the pandemic of COVID-19, and I want to talk about the pandemic of racism, of which you are intimately involved in, not just within your industry, but outside of that. But COVID-19, the pandemic of COVID-19, which perhaps no one saw coming, or at least did not see coming to the extent the impact is still being felt as we speak today, right, on July 9th, is a real challenge. So what have you seen in the real estate business in particular, and how has that been impacted or the commercial real estate or even residential real estate by COVID-19 and the rethinking of whenever this pandemic is over with, what work will look like, what will business look like in a post-COVID-19 scenario?
Okay. Well, I mean, you mentioned New York City. I came to New York City to do business in the development business in 2011, and I was astonished by the lack of economic inclusion. And New York City's number one local business is real estate, and how it is dominated by white men. And it's a industry, as I said, that low barriers to entry. Two of the most active and successful developers in New York City. One started off as a wig salesperson selling wigs out of the living room of his apartment. Another one, a taxi driver. And then there's one of the largest property owners had one little mini storage facility. And so they're low barriers to entry, but what those three people all had in common is consistent access to large pools of capital. That no one said, oh, you didn't have these credentials, you didn't have this education, you didn't have this experience, oh, you've got a good deal, we like the deal, and we're going to evaluate the deal, and we're going to make an investment decision based on the deal. What I saw with Black developers trying to get an affordable housing project financed, yet alone any kind of private sector deal financed, was it became not about the deal, it became about the developer or the asset manager, the property owner. And so it's very important in New York, the way deals are underwritten and why you have all these characters who, are buying real estate and doing real estate deals that you would never expect to be doing, $100 million to $1 billion deals, is because the people who are investing the capital say, we're looking at the deal. And so we don't care that he filed bankruptcy 6 years ago or that he's given his project back to the lenders. We like the deal, and if he screws up, we're taking it from him. When it comes to Black developers, it's all about the developer. So that's one of the biggest challenges that has happened, and the biggest barrier that Black people have confronted when trying to break through in the commercial real estate business, me included. It is almost always about me, my balance sheet, my experience, and I'll never forget on one of the deals we were pursuing, Forbes was saying I was a billionaire, and we had some litigation, a commission dispute with a broker over $400,000. It's a rounding error for us. And the lender was making an issue about that litigation. Now, I've never seen anything like it in my life, so I just said, oh, you guys don't want to do business with us, we're going elsewhere. But so everyone confronts that. But now, post-COVID and Black Lives Matter, again, it's about the developer, but now they're more receptive. I was on a phone call yesterday with someone who was a very influential person in terms of pension funds. And I was saying we're doing this emerging developer focusing on women and African Americans. And this was a white woman. And she said, look, we want to focus, invest our money with African American developers. And I've never heard that before coming out of anybody. But she said, we want to focus, that's where the need is, that's where there's an issue, and that's where we want to focus our money. And so I think that this moment in time today, when it comes to where we are with COVID and also with Black Lives Matter and the country coming to grips with the reality that there is systemic discrimination in this country. And when it comes to Black men, we have rarely been given a fair chance at anything. I think that this is a moment, if we can push this harder and business leaders can step up and say that, this system's unfair, I think we'll see some greater opportunity. And I see there's a greater opportunity in the real estate space. Communities of color are gentrifying. There's a tremendous need for affordable and workforce housing. And there's now the mindset potentially that these communities should be developed by people reflective of who lives in them. And then, of course, real estate's highly capital intensive, and the equity on $1 billion project equity on that is going to be $350 million. Most developers don't have $350 million of equity. So they leverage with private equity, and maybe to do a $1 billion deal, they put up $35 million. So the residual 300 and some odd million dollars comes from private equity. The biggest investors in private equity are public pension systems. And in places like New York, Philadelphia, California, and others, the workforce is diverse. And most often, by the way, the governmental workforces around our country's major cities are disproportionately Black. So if the Black population in New York City is 26%, you can count on the workforce being, 35%, because we don't get many other opportunities for jobs. So the government's the best place to go. White people get all kinds of opportunities, so they are lower generally than their population numbers in terms of government workforce. But the irony is all our money goes to support white developers, and rarely does it go to support Black developers or Black business people.
Right. I mean, that's the ironic part of the stats that you shared, which is startling, is the percentage of the population, the pension money that goes towards it, the amount of capital that's raised either through private equity or venture capital, what have you, that goes out to white entrepreneurs, white developers. And yet it never comes back in terms, the percentages are single digit, low single digit in regards to the total amount of capital. And you had shared the statistic before, and I'd love you to share it again, as to what was the amount of money, percentage-wise, that was going towards African-American real estate development out of the entire private equity real estate fund or real estate market that is going to real estate development. What percentage of that actually went to Black developers?
We'll give you a perspective. There's $69 trillion in private equity and venture capital investments. Out of that $69 trillion, less than 1.3% of it is invested with firms that are managed or owned or run by people of color or women. If you look at real estate alone, less than 0.25% of real estate private equity dollars go to developers or investments that are owned by people of color as a whole. And so if you look at and then African Americans barely register when it comes to access to private equity money. And because, in fact, I can't think of more than maybe 2 or 3 Black developers in the country that receive institutional capital for their real estate projects. And so what you have is you have the rest of the market going out here doing deals. And by the way, there is an oversupply of capital versus real estate deals, meaning that there's more money to go around than there are good deals. So, but when it comes to Black developers or real estate investors, rarely do we get access to institutional capital. And that's why you don't have much diversity in any major city in America. I mean, even the Atlantas and the DCs and the like, you won't find, more than a couple of Black developers of scale. And that's all because there's this discriminatory fashion in which capital is deployed, because the allocators, so the capital is our money, and disproportionately minorities and women who pay into these public employee pension systems, the allocators are the same. They're the big Wall Street investment banks and financial services firms, and they allocate the money to the people that they know and that they're comfortable with. That's why, for example, New York City gets a disproportionate share of private equity capital for real estate deals, because these investors, these allocators know who they are, and they know the city itself. And so it's a very incestuous relationship.
Given that and the focus now, and you talked a little bit about this fund that you created last year to raise money with intentionality to help minority real estate developers get in on deals. Talk a little bit about that. What got you behind that in the first place? Where you were fed up in watching this and said, "Listen, I'm tired of people saying they can't find people, they can't do it. So I'm going to raise the fund myself and help to raise this fund so that we can start to be able to develop the next generation of real estate developers who happen to be Black." So talk a little bit about that fund and your term that you called affirmative development, right? And what is affirmative development, and a little bit about this fund and how you're going to move on to get this next generation to be involved in this important industry.
Yeah. Well, look, affirmative development is what we have been practicing as a company throughout my career. It's interesting. My wife and I and our team were sitting around trying to figure out how could we, in a tagline, describe what we stand for as a company. And my wife came up with the idea of affirmative development because we were talking about affirmative action and how that had been branded in a negative way when it really was a positive step to make up, for the 246 years of slavery and 100 plus years of economic and educational oppression. But that was outlawed. And so we as companies, though, are free to do what we want to do. And so we've made steps throughout our career to show that our buildings mean more than just buildings of brick and mortar, but they are symbols of equal economic opportunity, and to demonstrate that we can include everybody in our success with opportunities and result in a superior product. And so we have an approach to doing business that we want our project workforce and the consultants and everybody involved in our team to be reflective of the population demographics of where we're doing business. And we've encouraged other developers, white developers, to do that. And so that is what we've done as a company. And throughout our company's history, we've gone north of 25% of all of our contracts to minority businesses. And now we're looking at 35% minority and women businesses, vetting the female businesses because of the abuse that's taken place with white men having their wives front for them. So but what I've noticed over the years as our company and I got more visible as an entrepreneur is I got more and more deal flow from Black developers looking for capital. And they're looking for a few million here, 5 million there, and so forth. And the deals penciled out to produce, vastly superior returns, as the smaller deals tend to do. And so I would refer them to different places, and most often than not, the places I referred them would say the deal's too small or the developer's too inexperienced. And so over the years, to not see any major expansion in terms of diversification of our industry, I realized what the issue is. It's an inability to fairly access capital. And my view is that if the banks and the financial services firms want to help diversity, just do business with us in the same way you do business with everybody else. Give us the same opportunity. And so since that hasn't been done and I understand how the capital is allocated and where it's come from, I have decided to challenge the system by saying, look, we're building a fund. We're going to target. You don't have to go to Russia. You don't have to go to Southeast Asia to look for real estate deals. I was looking at one of these pension funds that we're pitching, and they've got investments in European real estate funds run by American companies. But those companies don't need to go to Europe to invest our capital. They can do it right here because there's a whole army of talented entrepreneurs that just don't have access to capital. But with capital, would produce great returns, hire people from within the community. And also, I believe that if people who are building affordable housing and workforce housing in communities of color where they're from, they're going to take a more personalized interest in providing a good quality product and good value. And they also, Black developers, we all know we're not going to get the second chances and the third chances. I mean, we don't get to file bankruptcy and start and live another day. So I decided that I could prove that there's a business model for this, produce superior returns, make money for our investors, and also transform the industry. And while, it's a great idea, no one's told us it's not a good idea. No pension fund has said, we don't like it. But I mean, it's been a very challenging process to get them to get to the finish line, even though the political leaders, the controllers and so forth say how progressive they are. When it comes to taking some steps to empower Black developers or even women, they have been slow to move. But we're making progress on it now. I mean, after Floyd's death and the protests and the advancement of an agenda by Black Lives Matter, now corporate America is afraid, and the politicians are afraid that business models may be disrupted, and so there's a more receptivity now to our concept. So I'm going to keep trying until I get it done. It's not a big fund, and we're going to do the first fund, and then we're going to do more of them. And because there's an exceptional business opportunity out here to provide capital to talented entrepreneurs, and I try to get everyone I talk to, who's vastly majority white, that this is not philanthropic. You're making a great business decision. And if we can scale it up, then you're going to make even more money. But don't look at us and don't look at this vehicle as philanthropic. It's not. You'll make more money off this deal than you will with one of these name brand white developers.
Yeah, the pandemic of racism that we've talked about, and again, it was heightened by what happened with George Floyd and frankly a number of other Black men who had been murdered at the hands of police and otherwise, and it just got to the point where people have had enough, and it has brought a renewed consciousness to racism in this country and how it has impacted Black lives in a profound way. A lot of corporations, Don, right now, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of some responsibility or obligation, have come out and made these grand pronouncements. We're going to invest $100 million in social justice. We're going to invest $200 million and $300 million in trying to fix things and leveling the playing field. But I fear that these are announcements without teeth. And there has to be a way of us trying to hold corporate America accountable to these statements. So this just doesn't become this happened for a couple of months, and then when the next big thing, whatever the next big thing comes on, and they can kind of forget about it and no one will hold them accountable. The question is, how do we hold them accountable? How do we hold corporate America to its word, to its principle? I was talking to a CEO last week, and he asked me, which seemed like a strange question, but I appreciated his honesty. And he said to me, "What is it that Black people want?" And he wasn't trying to be funny. He was like, really, what is it that Black people want? Because he goes, because the Black people I'm surrounded by at my company, they seem fairly happy. And I said, well, okay, your view, your lens was a lens at a different level, which is why you only saw a group of people who you felt were happy, didn't realize they were that unhappy. And I said, what do we want? Well, what we want is really very simple. We want jobs, we want promotions, we want access to capital, and we want opportunities, right? That's not complicated, but somehow or other, it's become complicated. It's, I had dinner last night with a very good friend, and he was asking me, well, what seems to be the breakdown? I said, here we are in 2020, and of the S&P 500, the 500 largest corporations in this country by market cap, we only have 5 Black CEOs. I said, now you can tell me that's a happy coincidence, or you can honestly look at this and say, this is systemic racism that has kept us in this position, because these 5 CEOs are not the first 5 smart people who've come through, right? Been decades and decades and generations of Black executives who have done very well. So my question to you is, and you're dealing with not just corporations that you're doing real estate development with, but other corporations, banks, and others that are lending money to you and otherwise. how do we hold these companies accountable so that we really can see this direct investment? We can see the promotions, we can see the employment numbers go up, and that we've leveled the playing field. Because if you're not intentional about it, if they don't make a move to be intentional about it, it will never happen. And this will just be another promise unfulfilled.
Yeah, I mean, you make some very good points. I think George Floyd's death was eye-opening because, I mean, it was on video and so forth. But I think also the Amy Cooper situation is more illustrative of our real problem when it comes to economic opportunity. She likely voted for Hillary Clinton. She would consider herself progressive. She lives in America's most diverse city. And she, up until that incident, was working at a global allocator of capital, including one that actually has an emerging manager program. And yet she saw her ability in a public park confrontation because a black bird watcher asked her to put her dog on a leash as a sign said. She decided to weaponize the police because she felt that power dynamic was in her favor, and that the presumption of criminal conduct would be against a black man who happened to be Harvard educated as well. Right. And so that person who sits in a room allocating capital sees us as inferior. And by the way, in every way, and has a paternalistic view of how they look at us. And in the best of their days, by the way, it's paternalistic. And so the challenge is that these companies look at us through a diversity program. They look at us through, okay, they've got problems, what do they want? The way that we get ahead of this is to say, wait a minute here. We are looking for talent all over the globe. We go to these colleges and we're recruiting. One, we should be going to historically black colleges to recruit. But here we have this, our executive, team has 1% of it is black, and yet the black Americans are 13% of our population. We need to rebalance that a bit, or instead of 5 CEOs, there should have been 65 CEOs, because the goal here in a fair democracy is that, results and opportunity ought to be reflective of population demographics. So those disparities show every one of these companies that they have failed to capture their fair share, market share. So that doesn't mean take opportunities away, doesn't mean fire white people. It means hire more black people, hire more, do more business with more black people, grow your businesses. And so the way this changes is Bank of America, instead of wanting to throw $100 million at something, says, you know what, we make, $10 billion, or $100 billion in real estate loans in New York City. We need to make sure that 26% of those loans are made to black developers. Or we, Goldman Sachs, we make, $300 billion in private equity investments, and we're going to make that, but we don't do any with black developers. We're going to change that. So it's doing business with us. Either they subscribe to the view that talent is distributed equally, which it is, and therefore there's talent out there that they're not capturing. They'll be better for it. And so they need to operate from that perspective, do business with us, just like they do business with everybody else. Hire us with the same standard you hire everybody else. Don't expect black people to, as business people and professionals, to bat 900 when you get into the corporate hall of fame batting 300. Treat us the same. And that's where there's a missing element here. They look at us through a diversity lens or a philanthropic lens, as opposed to there's a huge market share that we're not getting. And I think that's, and also the pension systems and any kind of public pension system or union pension system, where they're either making private equity investors, or generally speaking, the largest shareholder in one of these public companies, they've got to say, look, if you don't practice diversity in terms of economic opportunity and career opportunity, we're going to dump your stock and we're not going to buy it anymore. And we're not going to, and if you don't bring us results of, reaching markets that you haven't before with Black entrepreneurs, we're not going to give you our capital anymore. That's going to be how we grade you. And I think it's got to be that seismic shift. And our political leaders have to step up and stop just fighting for social justice when the issue of the moment comes, but fight for economic reciprocity, like Kwesi Mfume did when he ran the NAACP. I mean, there would be no Black hotel owners in this country today if it wasn't for Mfume when he was running the NAACP and did their annual report card.
Right. I mean, we have to be very careful that the word diversity doesn't become a diversion away from Black. And I think one of the things that I've witnessed in corporate America is people want to use their diversity number, and they'll say, well, 38% of our workforce is diverse and 26% of our suppliers are diverse and what have you. And then when you peel the covers back and you look down and see, then you realize, well, wait a minute, we've added white women, LBGQT, community. We've added veterans. We've added, anybody we can possibly handicap, anyone we can possibly think of that's not a white male fits into this diversity, gumbo, if you will. And what I want to do is focus on, and what I want to make sure that we as Black business people and Black business leaders do is focus on is specifically, give me your number that's Black. I want to know about the Black, because the Black problem is a real issue. There are politicians today that can't even say the word Black, scared to use the word Black. And so if we continue to allow that word to be considered a negative and not to be focused on specifically, I'm heartened to hear what you were saying, that the lady you were talking to from the pension fund said, no, I'm specifically looking for African-American developers. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take bold leadership like that and bold initiatives like that, because we can't do it at the margins. I don't think, Don, a little bit here, a little bit there, whatever. There has to be some bold initiatives that take a quantum leap forward to get us onto some kind of level playing field, because that's what you see. And people talk about the sports industry as a whole. And, the thing about sports is that it's one of the few true meritocracies you can see where your performance on the field or on the court is ultimately what gets you paid.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas you can't say that in real estate, right? You can't say that your performance, because Don, your performance is as good as any other person's performance without regard to color or gender or what have you. Yet, even with your success and what you've achieved and what you're putting up, what have you, you still face that person who looks at you a little sideways and wants to spend more time focusing again on you rather than the project. And I think that was one of the things I took away from our conversation today, which was really, really true, is that too much time is spent looking at the individual rather than the deal. This is not just in real estate, this could be anything. Mm-hmm. And them thinking to you or saying to you, Don, you have enough. When have you ever heard someone who did not look like us, white man, when someone come up to a white man and say, you know what, you've had enough. You've got enough wealth. We're going to slow you down now, and we're going to move this along to someone else. That's never come out of the mouth. But as it relates to Black folks, always is. I want to give you one sort of final opportunity to share some words of wisdom with budding entrepreneurs and who right now, feel beaten down upon, don't feel as if there's access to capital, don't feel as if there's opportunity, are unsure of how things are going to, emerge out of COVID-19. give us some words of wisdom, some encouragement for that next generation, and talk about, how no is nothing more than the road on the way to yes, and what they can become.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are at a place in time where the country is now compelled to look at the unfairness of the system when it comes to Black Americans. And of course, that's deeply rooted in 246 years of slavery and 100 plus years of dire, extreme oppression. And our ancestors built this country, and this country's economy was built based upon the free labor of our ancestors who were kidnapped and brought here. To lump us in with people who voluntarily come here to immigrate, for example, or white women, is unfair, because neither of those constituencies have ever faced the extreme conditions that we as Black Americans have. And no one worked for free to build this nation. And so as a result, we are in a race that, say, call it the Indianapolis 500. And we're just as qualified as everybody else. However, our white competitors started on lap 400, and we are on lap 1. And they say, hey, you guys got the same car, you're both good drivers, hey, may the best person win. Well, no, that's not fair, because you're never going to catch up no matter what, unless the other drivers at lap 400 crash and burn. So the premise has got to be that this is unfair, and we're not going to accept it, and we're going to demand better, and we're going to spend our time educating everybody else in our communities about how capital is deployed. However, by remembering where our ancestors started and where we came from, and acknowledging the extreme discrimination that we confront, we can't use that as an excuse not to succeed. Because while success is going to be much more difficult, it's possible. And you got to keep knocking on the door and trying to knock down the door and go around it, or pick the lock, or figure it out. But we can't accept any excuses. And so there are no excuses here. We got to remember where we are, challenge the status quo, but also look for the opportunities, and keep knocking on the doors, and keep going to the different banks and the different investors, and not give up. It's a marathon. And so while we pursue current business opportunities, and they're out there for us, especially now with COVID-19 and with what happened with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And also, we cannot run away when white people confront us on, well, Black Lives Matter, everybody's life matters. Yeah, but what Black Lives Matters means is, Black entrepreneurship matters, Black education matters, Black access to capital matters, Black jobs matter. The fact of the matter is, we need to not apologize for that. But there are great opportunities out here, great opportunities to be transformative. And so you cannot give up. You see these as great windows of opportunity. And that's what I tell young people today, and emerging entrepreneurs, is take the lessons from the past, but use that as a vision and a roadmap for the future.
Don, thank you very much for your words of wisdom this morning. We truly appreciate it. You have been an inspiration for many generations of entrepreneurs. We wish you continued success in the years to come, and look forward to covering and watching what you're helping to develop. And we are humbled by your continued commitment to putting Black entrepreneurs at the top of the list, and making sure that they get the same opportunities that you fought so hard to get for yourself. So thank you, Don, on behalf of Black Enterprise and on behalf of Black America, for your success. God bless you, and continue the good work.
Thank you, Butch, very much. And thank Black Enterprise, and thank your father and your family for paving the way for us all, and knocking down these barriers and exposing them to where they exist. Because without Black Enterprise, many of us would never be here, and that's including me.
Thank you. Much appreciated.